They laughed at her, a fragile old widow, standing in front of a broken, rust-covered shed. "After a lifetime together, this is all he left you," someone mocked. But when her trembling hands turned that tiny key, her breath caught. Her heart froze. Because what she found inside wasn't just a secret. It was a truth her husband had hidden for years. And it was about to change her life forever. The house felt quieter than it ever had before, as if even the walls had stopped breathing. Zainab sat by the window she had shared with her husband for decades, her hands resting gently in her lap, her eyes fixed on the empty street outside. The world moved on as it always did. Children ran past laughing. Vendors called out their daily offers. Neighbors chatted across fences. But inside her small home, time had come to a standstill. Just a few weeks ago, this same space had been filled with the soft rhythm of another presence. Hassan's presence. The faint sound of his footsteps, the way he cleared his throat before speaking, the quiet comfort of knowing someone was there. Now there was nothing, just silence that stretched longer with each passing day. Grief didn't arrive all at once for Zainab. It came in waves, slow and heavy, like something pressing against her chest when she least expected it. Sometimes it was in the mornings, when she reached for a second cup of tea without thinking. Sometimes it was at night, when the other side of the bed remained untouched and cold. And sometimes it was in the smallest things, the way his old shawl still hung behind the door, the way his reading glasses remained on the table exactly where he had left them. She hadn't moved anything. She couldn't. It felt as if touching those things would erase him completely. People came in the beginning, they always do. Neighbors, distant relatives, even strangers who claimed to have known Hassan in some way. They brought food, offered prayers, spoke soft words filled with sympathy. "He was a good man," they said. "You were lucky to have him." Zainab nodded each time, her lips forming faint, polite smiles. But none of those words filled the emptiness he had left behind. None of them answered the quiet questions forming in her mind. Because as the days passed and the visitors stopped coming, another reality began to settle in. Hassan had not left behind much. No savings worth mentioning, no property papers neatly filed away, no hidden accounts waiting to be discovered. Their life had always been simple, but Zainab had believed, perhaps foolishly, that there would be something. Some form of security, something to hold onto in his absence. Instead, there was just one thing. A small rusted key. And a shed. She remembered the moment he had given it to her. It was just hours before he passed, his breathing shallow, his strength nearly gone. She had been sitting beside him, holding his hand, trying to stay strong even as her heart broke with every fragile breath he took. He had slowly reached under his pillow and pulled out the key, placing it into her trembling hand. His fingers lingered there for a moment longer than usual, as if he was trying to say something without words. "When the time feels right," he had whispered, his voice barely audible, "open it." At the time, she hadn't questioned him. There had been no space for questions in that moment, only fear and grief and the desperate hope that he might somehow stay. But now, those words echoed in her mind again and again, growing louder in the silence he had left behind. The shed. It stood at the far edge of their small piece of land, barely visible from the house. Zainab had passed by it countless times over the years, never giving it much thought. It had always seemed like nothing more than a place to store old tools and things that no longer mattered. Hassan would go there occasionally, though never for long. She had never asked why. There had never been a reason to. Now, it was the only thing he had left her. At first, she didn't go near it. Days passed, then weeks, and still the key remained untouched in her hand or resting quietly on the table beside her bed. Part of her was afraid of what she might find, or worse, what she might not find. What if there was nothing inside? What if this was all just a meaningless gesture, something she had misunderstood? The thought of opening that shed and finding only dust and broken tools felt heavier than she could bear. But there was something else too, something deeper. Hassan had never been careless. In all the years they had spent together, he had been a man of quiet habits and careful choices. He didn't do things without reason. He didn't leave things unfinished. And he certainly wouldn't have given her that key in that moment without meaning something by it. That thought stayed with her. It followed her through the quiet mornings and the long afternoons. It lingered in her mind as she sat alone with her memories, replaying every detail she could remember. The way he had looked at her when he handed her the key, the slight pressure of his fingers, the seriousness in his eyes. There had been something there. Something she hadn't understood at the time. Now it was all she had left to understand. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the yard, Zainab found herself standing near the back door. She hadn't planned it. Her feet had simply carried her there, step by step, as if guided by something she couldn't explain. The key was in her hand again, its cold metal pressing into her palm. She looked out toward the shed. From a distance, it looked even more worn than she remembered. The paint had peeled away in places, leaving the wood exposed to years of weather and neglect. The roof sagged slightly, as if it had grown tired of holding itself together. The door hung unevenly on its hinges, and the lock, old and rusted, seemed like it might break at the slightest touch. It didn't look like something that could hold value. It didn't look like something that could change anything. And yet, her heart began to beat a little faster. She took a step forward, then another. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if she was walking toward something unknown, something that could either bring her answers or leave her with even more questions. The air felt still around her, the usual sounds of the neighborhood fading into the background. All she could hear was the faint echo of Hassan's voice in her mind. When the time feels right. She wasn't sure if this was the right time. She wasn't sure if there ever would be a right time. But she knew one thing. She couldn't keep standing still forever. The next morning, the air carried a different kind of weight. It wasn't just grief anymore, it was attention. The kind that lingers, watches, and quietly judges. Zainab stepped out of her house with the same slow, careful movements, the small rusted key hidden in her palm, but something had shifted. People were noticing her now, not with sympathy but with curiosity. Word had spread. In small towns, it always does. By the time she reached the narrow path leading toward the edge of her land, 2 women standing near the well had already lowered their voices mid-conversation. Their eyes followed her, not openly, but enough for her to feel it. A man leaning against his bicycle paused longer than necessary, watching her direction. Even the children, who once ran freely without care, slowed down as they passed her, whispering things they didn't fully understand. She's going to the shed. That old broken one. Maybe there's treasure inside. A faint laugh followed. Zainab kept walking. She didn't turn around. She didn't react. But every word reached her, settling somewhere deep inside her chest, not sharp enough to hurt immediately, but heavy enough to stay. The shed stood in the same place, unchanged, quiet, and distant. But today it felt different, not because it had changed, but because everyone else had begun to look at it differently. What was once ignored had now become a source of curiosity, speculation, and quiet amusement. As she got closer, she noticed someone standing nearby. It was Rashid, a neighbor who had known Hassan for years. He wasn't unkind, but he carried the habit of speaking without thinking, his words often landing heavier than intended. He gave her a small nod. "You're really going to open it?" Zainab paused for a moment, her fingers tightening around the key. "I don't know yet," she replied softly. Rashid let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "Sister, I don't mean to say anything wrong, but that shed, it's been falling apart for years. Hassan barely used it. I doubt there's anything in there except old junk." His tone wasn't cruel, but it wasn't gentle either. It was the kind of honesty that people offer without considering whether it's needed. Zainab didn't respond immediately. Instead, she looked at the shed, then back at him. Hassan didn't do things without reason, she said quietly. Rashid shrugged. Maybe, or maybe he just didn't have anything else to leave. The words lingered in the air longer than they should have. Zainab gave a small nod, not in agreement but in acknowledgement. Then she stepped past him, continuing toward the shed. Behind her, she could feel his gaze still resting on her, mixed with curiosity and something else, something uncertain. By the time she reached the shed, a few more people had gathered at a distance, not close enough to seem intrusive, but near enough to watch. Some pretended to be busy, adjusting baskets or speaking to one another, but their attention was clearly fixed on her. It wasn't just about the shed anymore. It was about what it represented. A test, a mystery, a quiet spectacle. Zainab stood in front of the door, her heart beating steadily, though her hands felt slightly colder now. The key remained in her palm, its rough edges pressing against her skin. She could feel the weight of their expectations. Or maybe their doubts. To them this was simple, a broken shed, a meaningless inheritance, a final reminder that Hassan had left nothing behind. But to her, it wasn't that simple. It couldn't be. She remembered the years they had spent together, how careful he had always been, how deliberate his actions were. He wasn't a man who left loose ends. He wasn't someone who would make a meaningless gesture, especially not in his final moments. And yet, a small voice in her mind began to question that certainty. What if they were right? What if there really was nothing inside? What if she opened that door, only to confirm what everyone already believed, that there was no hidden meaning, no secret, no purpose? The thought made her chest tighten, because it wasn't just about the shed anymore. It was about Hassan, about everything she believed about him, about the trust she had placed in his final words. Behind her, a voice called out, slightly louder this time. "Go on, open it." A few soft chuckles followed. Another voice added, "Maybe he left gold inside." More laughter. Zainab closed her eyes for a brief moment. Not in frustration, but in stillness. She let the noise fade, focusing only on her breathing, on the steady rhythm of her heart, on the memory of Hassan's voice, the way he had looked at her, the quiet seriousness in his eyes. There had been something there. Something real. When she opened her eyes again, the world felt quieter, even though the people were still there, still watching, still waiting. She stepped closer to the door. The wood looked older up close, the cracks deeper, the rust on the lock more visible. It didn't look like something that could hold value. It didn't look like something worth protecting. But appearances had never meant much to her. Or to Hassan. She lifted her hand slowly, bringing the key toward the lock. It hovered there for a moment, just inches away. Her fingers trembled slightly. Not from weakness, but from the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about opening a door. This was about stepping into the unknown. About facing whatever truth waited on the other side. And about proving, perhaps only to herself, that Hassan's final gift wasn't empty. Behind her, the murmurs grew softer, more focused. Even the laughter had faded now, replaced by anticipation. They were curious, maybe even a little uncertain. Because deep down, everyone wondered the same thing. What if there was something inside? What if they were wrong? Zainab took a slow breath. Her grip on the key steadied. For a brief moment, she looked at the shed not as a broken structure, but as something more, something holding a piece of the past, something connected to the man she had spent her life with. Whatever was inside, it carried meaning. Even if she didn't understand it yet. Even if no one else believed it. She moved her hand forward. The key touched the lock. Cold metal against rust. A small, quiet contact that somehow felt louder than anything else. Her heart began to beat faster again. But this time, it wasn't just fear. It was something else, something closer to resolve, because no matter what waited inside, she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't walk away, now the key resisted at first. Zainab tightened her grip, her fingers pressing harder against the cold metal as she tried again. The lock groaned, stiff from years of neglect, as if it too was hesitant to give in. For a brief moment, she wondered if it would even open at all. Maybe time had sealed it shut. Maybe whatever was inside was never meant to be seen again. Then, with a sudden sharp sound, click, the noise echoed louder than it should have, cutting through the stillness around her. It felt like something had shifted, not just in the lock but in the air itself. Behind her, the murmurs stopped. Zainab slowly pulled the key out, her breath shallow now, her chest rising and falling just a little faster than before. She placed her hand on the door. The wood was rough beneath her palm, worn and splintered in places. For a second she hesitated. Then she pushed. The door creaked open, long and slow, as if it hadn't moved in years. Dust stirred in the narrow beam of sunlight that slipped inside, dancing in the air like tiny fragments of time itself. The smell of old wood and rust drifted outward, faint but unmistakable. Zainab stepped forward. The inside of the shed was dim, the light barely reaching the corners. Shapes began to form as her eyes adjusted, shelves, boxes, scattered tools. Nothing unusual, nothing extraordinary. Just as everyone had said. Old things. Forgotten things. Her shoulders lowered slightly, the tension in her chest easing, but not in relief. It felt more like disappointment, quiet and heavy. She took another step inside. The floor creaked beneath her weight. Every sound felt amplified in the stillness, as if the shed itself was listening. Outside, she could sense the presence of those who had gathered, waiting, watching, but their voices had faded into the background. Inside, it was just her, and whatever Hassan had left behind. She moved closer to a wooden table near the center. A layer of dust covered its surface, thick enough to leave marks when touched. She ran her fingers across it absent-mindedly, revealing the wood beneath. Nothing. She glanced at the shelves along the wall. Rusted tools hung loosely from nails, old hammers, bent nails, pieces of metal that had long lost their purpose. A broken lantern sat in one corner, its glass cracked, its base tilted. Everything looked exactly as it should in a place like this. Abandoned. Empty. Her heart sank a little deeper. So this is it, she whispered to herself. Her voice sounded unfamiliar in the quiet, softer than she expected. She turned slowly, scanning the rest of the space as if something might suddenly reveal itself. But nothing did. Just more boxes stacked unevenly, their lids slightly open or pushed aside. She walked toward them. The first box she opened held nothing but old cloth, worn, faded, torn at the edges. The second contained rusted nails and screws, their surfaces corroded beyond use. The third pieces of wood, broken and splintered. Each box felt the same. Ordinary. Pointless. Her movements grew slower. Not out of caution, but out of fading hope. This wasn't what she had expected. Or maybe it was exactly what she had feared. She stood still for a moment, the silence pressing in around her again. The air felt heavier now, as if it carried something unseen, something she couldn't quite understand. Her eyes drifted back toward the door. For a brief moment, she considered leaving. Closing the door, locking it again and walking away. Letting this remain, just another unanswered question. Because maybe that was easier. Easier than accepting that there was nothing more. But as she took a step toward the door, something stopped her. A sound. Faint. Almost too quiet to notice. Tick. She froze. Her head tilted slightly, her breath catching. Tick-tick. It was subtle, uneven but unmistakable. Zainab turned slowly, her eyes narrowing as she tried to locate the source. The shed fell into an even deeper silence, as if everything else had paused just to let that sound be heard. Tick, tick, tick. Her heart began to beat faster again, this time not from fear, but from something closer to curiosity. There shouldn't have been any sound. Everything here was old, broken, lifeless. And yet, the ticking continued. She followed it carefully, her steps slow, deliberate. Each movement felt more important now, more focused. The sound seemed to come from the far corner of the shed, where the light barely reached. She moved closer, closer, until she saw it. A small wooden box, resting on a low shelf, partially hidden behind a stack of old boards. It didn't look special. In fact, it looked just as worn as everything else. But the sound was coming from inside it. Tick-tick. Zainab reached out, her hand hovering over the box for a moment before she touched it. The wood was smoother than she expected, less damaged, as if it had been placed there more recently than the other items. Carefully, she lifted the lid. Inside, a clock. Small, round, old, but still working. The hands moved slowly, marking each second with that steady, quiet rhythm. Zainab stared at it, her eyes widening slightly. How, she whispered. Nothing else in the shed worked, nothing else had been maintained, and yet this clock was still alive. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached inside, lifting it gently. It felt heavier than it looked, solid, deliberate. As she held it, something shifted beneath it. A piece of folded paper. Her breath caught. Slowly she set the clock aside and picked up the paper. It was slightly yellowed at the edges, but not as old as the rest of the items. It had been protected, kept safe. Her hands began to shake again. Not from doubt this time, but from anticipation. Because deep down she already knew. This wasn't random. This wasn't forgotten. This was meant to be found. She unfolded the paper carefully, her fingers moving slower than usual, as if afraid of tearing it, or perhaps afraid of what it might say. Her eyes dropped to the writing. Familiar. Every letter, every curve, every line. Hassan's handwriting. Her chest tightened instantly. A wave of emotion rose inside her, sudden and overwhelming. For a moment she couldn't breathe. It felt as if he was there again, as if his presence had somehow returned through those words. Her vision blurred slightly, but she blinked quickly, forcing herself to focus. This was it. This was what he had left for her. Not the shed. Not the tools. Not the boxes. But this. The ticking clock. And the letter beneath it. Her grip on the paper tightened slightly, her heart pounding louder with each passing second. Whatever answers she had been searching for, whatever meaning she had hoped to find, it was all here now. Waiting for her to understand, her eyes moved slowly across the first line, as if each word carried more weight than the last. Zainab, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. Her fingers tightened around the paper. The world around her seemed to fade, the dusty shed, the distant murmurs outside, everything dissolved into silence. It was just her and his words now. She swallowed hard and continued. I never wanted to leave you with questions, but there are things I didn't have the courage to say while I was alive. A faint tremor passed through her hands. Hassan had never been a man of many words, but he had never been distant either. He spoke when it mattered. He chose his moments carefully. And now, reading this, Zainab felt something unfamiliar pressing against her heart. Uncertainty. She kept reading. What you're about to find is not a gift. It is a burden I carried for years. Her breath slowed. A burden. Her eyes shifted quickly to the next lines, her heartbeat growing louder in her ears. Behind the wall of this shed, there is something I hid, not because I was proud of it, but because I was afraid. Zainab froze. Her gaze lifted instinctively, scanning the wooden walls around her. They looked the same as before, aged, cracked, ordinary. Nothing stood out at first glance. But now, everything felt different. She looked back at the letter, her chest tightening. Years ago, I made a mistake, a choice I regretted every day after. I kept something that was never mine. The words hit her harder than she expected. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. Hassan. A mistake. Her mind resisted the idea immediately. It didn't fit the man she had known for so long. The careful, honest man who measured every decision. The man who would rather go without than take what didn't belong to him. And yet, these were his words, written in his own hand. She read on, slower now, as if afraid of what the next sentence might reveal. At first I told myself I would return it, that I would fix everything. But time passed, and my fear grew stronger than my honesty. Zainab's grip on the paper tightened. Fear. She had never seen that in him, not like this. Her eyes blurred slightly, but she forced herself to keep reading. I built our life with that silence. Every meal, every comfort, a part of it carried that secret. Her chest felt heavy now. Not just with confusion, but with something deeper. A quiet ache. Because this wasn't just about money. This was about trust. About the life they had shared. About the truth she thought she knew. Her eyes moved to the next lines, almost hesitating. I wanted to tell you, many times, but I couldn't bear the thought of you looking at me differently. A tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. Because she understood that feeling. The fear of being seen differently. The fear of losing the one person who mattered most. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, holding the letter close to her chest. Memories flooded her mind, years of shared laughter, quiet evenings, small conversations that now felt heavier than before. Had there been signs? Had she missed something? Or had he hidden it so well that even she couldn't see it? She opened her eyes again, returning to the letter. There was more. I don't expect forgiveness, not from you, not from anyone, but I couldn't leave this world without trying to make it right. Her breath caught. Make it right. Her eyes dropped to the final part of the letter. Everything I hid is still here. Behind the wall, I never touched it again after that day. Zainab felt her heartbeat quicken. Behind the wall. Her gaze slowly lifted, scanning the shed again, this time with new awareness. Nothing looked the same anymore. Every plank of wood, every uneven surface suddenly felt like it was hiding something. Her eyes stopped at one section. A part of the wall that seemed slightly different. The color was faintly lighter, the wood less worn, subtle but noticeable now that she was looking for it. Her breath grew shallow. This was it. Her hand trembled as she lowered the letter slightly, her attention fixed on that spot. But before she could move, her eyes dropped back to the final lines. I know this is unfair to you, to leave you with this choice, but you are stronger than I ever was. Her throat tightened. A choice. That word echoed in her mind. She continued reading. You can walk away and no one will ever know. You can keep it and live in comfort, or you can do what I couldn't. Zainab felt a sudden weight settle over her shoulders. Not physical, but something deeper. He wasn't just confessing. He was asking. No. He was trusting her. Return it. Give it back to those it belongs to. Free yourself from what I carried for so long. Her hands began to shake again, more intensely this time. This wasn't what she had expected. Not even close. She had come here searching for meaning, for answers, maybe even for a small piece of security in a life that suddenly felt uncertain. Instead, she had found this: a truth she never imagined, a burden she never asked for, and a decision she wasn't ready to make. Her eyes lingered on the last line. "Whatever you choose, I will understand, but I hope you choose what is right." Silence filled the space around her. The ticking of the clock seemed louder now, each second marking the weight of what she had just read. Zainab lowered the letter slowly, her hands still trembling. Her gaze drifted back to the wall, to the place where the truth was hidden. For a long moment she didn't move. Her mind was racing, thoughts colliding, emotions rising all at once. Disbelief, confusion, hurt, and something else. Something harder to name. Because this wasn't just about what Hassan had done. It was about what she would do now. She looked down at her hands. Old, fragile, marked by years of work and sacrifice. Hands that had built a life beside him. Hands that now held his final secret. A part of her wanted to walk away. To leave the shed, close the door, and pretend none of this had ever happened. To protect the memory of the man she loved. To hold onto the version of him she knew. But another part of her wouldn't let her. Because the truth was already here. And once seen, it couldn't be unseen. Her grip on the letter tightened slightly. Her breathing steadied just a little. Slowly, very slowly. She took a step toward the wall. The choice was no longer distant. It was right in front of her for a long time. Zainab didn't move. She stood in the middle of the shed. The letter still trembling in her hands, the quiet ticking of the clock echoing through the silence like a reminder that time never stopped, no matter how heavy a moment became. Her eyes drifted once more to the hidden section of the wall. Behind it, the truth. Behind it, the choice. Slowly she stepped forward. Each movement felt deliberate now, not guided by curiosity anymore, but by something deeper, something steadier. Her hand reached out, brushing against the wood. It felt no different from the rest of the wall, yet she knew what lay behind it. She could feel it, not physically, but in the weight pressing against her chest. She hesitated, not because she doubted what was there, but because she understood what it meant. Taking a quiet breath, she picked up the old hammer lying nearby. Her fingers wrapped around its worn handle, her grip firmer than before. This time, there was no trembling, only resolve. She struck the wall. The sound broke through the stillness, sharp, final. Again. The wood cracked slightly. And again. On the third strike, a section gave way, splintering just enough to reveal darkness behind it. Zainab stepped back for a moment, her heart pounding, not with fear, but with the gravity of what she was about to uncover. Carefully, she pulled the broken pieces aside. And there it was. A hidden compartment. Neatly arranged inside were boxes, old but preserved, untouched by time in the same way the rest of the shed had been. She reached in and pulled one out. Her hands paused over the lid. Then slowly she opened it. Bundles of cash. Stacked, ordered, real. Her breath caught. She stared at it, unable to move for a moment. It didn't feel real. It didn't feel like something that belonged in her hands, in her life. She opened another box. More money. Another. The same. The reality settled in. Hassan had been telling the truth. This wasn't just a secret. It was a burden he had carried alone. Zainab sat down slowly on the dusty floor, the box still open beside her. The sight of it all blurred slightly as her eyes filled with tears, not of joy, but of something far more complicated. Because this money could change everything. No more worrying about food. No more counting every coin. No more facing the quiet fear of growing old with nothing. For the first time since Hassan's death, she could feel something close to security. A life without struggle. A life she had never allowed herself to imagine. Her fingers brushed lightly against the bundles, almost as if testing whether they were real. They were. And they were hers. Or at least, they could be. Her grip tightened slightly. She thought about the empty house. The silence. The long days that stretched endlessly. This money could fill that emptiness in ways nothing else could. She could fix the house. Hire help. Live comfortably for the rest of her life. No one would question it. No one would know. The thought lingered. Tempting. Quietly persuasive. But then, her eyes shifted to the letter still lying beside her. The words returned instantly. I kept something that was never mine. A deep breath left her lips. She closed the box slowly. The sound felt heavier than it should have. This wasn't a gift. It never had been. It was a test. A reflection of a mistake that had stretched across years and now rested in her hands. Zainab leaned back slightly, her gaze fixed somewhere beyond the walls of the shed, beyond the money, beyond the moment itself. She thought about Hassan, not just the man in the letter, but the man she had lived with. The one who had shared meals with her. The one who had laughed quietly, who had listened more than he spoke. The one who had carried something heavy inside him, without ever letting it show. A tear rolled down her cheek. He trusted me, she whispered. Not to keep it, but to fix it. That realization settled deep within her. This wasn't about what she could gain. It was about what she could become. She slowly stood up, her movement steady now, her mind clearer than it had been in days. The conflict inside her didn't disappear completely, but it quieted. Because somewhere between the temptation and the truth, she had already made her choice. The following days were not easy. Word spread quickly that Zainab had found something in the shed. Curiosity turned into speculation, speculation into rumors. People watched her more closely now, waiting to see what she would do. Some assumed she would keep it. Others believed she already had. She deserves it, someone said. After all she's been through, another added. Zainab heard it all. But she said nothing. Instead, she gathered everything carefully, every box, every note, every detail Hassan had left behind. And then one morning, she walked into the town square. The same place where people had once whispered about her. Now they stood openly, watching. Waiting. She held a file in her hands, her posture straight, her expression calm. But there was something different in her eyes now. Something stronger. I have something to say, she began. The murmurs faded instantly. My husband made a mistake. The words landed softly, but carried far. Some people shifted uncomfortably. Others leaned in curious. Zainab continued, her voice steady. And I am here to make it right. Over the next weeks, she did exactly that. With the help of local authorities, records were traced, names were found, and what had been taken years ago slowly began to return to where it belonged. It wasn't simple. It wasn't quick. But she didn't stop. Not even once. And something unexpected began to happen. The same people who had once laughed at her started looking at her differently. Not with curiosity. Not with pity. But with respect. Because what she had chosen wasn't easy. It wasn't comfortable. But it was right. Months later, the shed still stood at the edge of her land. But everything else had changed. Not in wealth. Not in luxury. But in meaning. With the small portion of money that legally remained unclaimed, Zainab chose to build something new. A small community center. Simple, warm, open to those who had nowhere else to go. Widows, the elderly, the forgotten, people like her. And every time someone walked through those doors, they didn't see loss. They saw strength. They saw dignity. They saw what it meant to choose integrity when it mattered most. One quiet evening, Zainab stood outside the shed once again. The same key rested in her hand. But it felt different now. Lighter. She looked at the sky, her eyes soft, her lips forming a faint, peaceful smile. "You didn't leave me wealth," she whispered. "You left me a chance. A chance to choose. A chance to rise above fear. A chance to do what was right, even when it was hard." She closed her eyes briefly, feeling a calm she hadn't known in a long time. Because in the end, she hadn't just uncovered a hidden truth. She had discovered her own strength. Moral. True inheritance is not measured in money or possessions, but in the values we choose to uphold. When faced with difficult choices, integrity and honesty define who we truly are. Doing the right thing may not always bring comfort, but it brings something far greater: peace, respect, and a legacy that outlives us. This story is fictional and created for entertainment and inspirational purposes only. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental. The story is meant to convey a moral lesson and does not represent real-life facts or situations.